Uh, Timekeeper, we are about to begin now. Right. Prime Minister, are you speaking? Can see you now.
So I will start. Am I audible? Hi.
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right. So I will start the debate in 3, 2, 1. A very good morning to adjudicators, to members of the House, and also my respectful opponents from the opposition side. We, the government team, are strongly agree with the motions that this House believe that spouses of political figures should not be recognized as a public figures. So the important words in our motions right now are the political figures, spouses of political figures, and also the public figures. So what is political figures, ladies and gentlemen? So political figures means any government official means any government officials, any immediate family member of any government official or any political party. The meaning for the spouses of political figures is that anyone who married with political figures who is not involved in political affairs, who does not involve in any political affairs, and the meaning for the public figures are can be defined as an individual or entity that has acquired fame or notoriety or has been participated in a particular public controversy. So the status quo right now the status quo right now that we government will bring in to this debate is that nowadays there are a lot of famous political figures who married a normal person and makes their spouses being recognized by the public and hence make them a public figure together with their partner. So the burden for this status quo is that the normal people doesn't want to be recognized by the public eye. So the stakeholders that we, the government sides, will bring into this debate is that the spouses of the political figures and also the political figures themselves. So the metric of this debate is whether the spouses of political figures should be recognized as a public figures or not, and why this is not justifiable. So the burden for this debate is that we want to prove that these spouses of political figures should not be recognized as a public figures. So here come my first argument. So my first argument is that the recognition of these spouses of political figures as a public figures will increase the chances of stigmatizations from the public. Imagine you marry someone who love, but your spouses just happens to be someone recognized by masses, a political figure. Even worse, you, despite having a little to no relations to their field of work, get associated them as you are now recognized as a public figure due to your spouse's occupations. Hence, the moment they do wrong in the public eye, you will receive the blame and stigmatization as well. So this is absolutely detrimental to the mental and emotional health of these spouses as it encourages the mob mentally of hating over someone closely related to a hated public figure despite not being any position of fault. This will eventually lead to turmoil within a household as the cause of this problem is simply the fact that their spouses are political figures and we can't really expect them to uh drop their jobs just like that for for the comfort of their spouses. Can't we? So the preemptive that the government sides, will bring is that the side oppositions might argue that this process can be viewed in a positive light as well. But this still promote the mentality that relates them to these political figures without considering their own individuality. So instead of being viewed positively as themselves, the public will only view them based on their spouse who happens to be a political figure. So uh, the social impact that we governments can think of is that if this process of public figures are recognized as public figures, if this process of political figures are recognized as a public figures, it will encourage a negative mob mentality, which causes people to wrongly perceive people who have done nothing to achieve their popularity in the first place. So the comparisons of their best case scenario and our worst case scenario is that their best case scenario is disposers of these political figures will have a platform of louder voice to advocate for what they think is right and beneficial and so on. But this will not only change the fact that their identity in public will be largely centered around their politician spouses, hence talking away their individuality and true personality. And our worst case scenario that we want to compare with their best case scenario is that this process will lack the public intentions needed to popularize their opinions and agendas that might be beneficial to society as relating to their politicians' versus ideals, but at least their individuality and privacy will be kept and maintained. In conclusions, we side of government protect the stakeholders better as we are able to make sure that they are recognized as themselves and maintain their individuality. So we, the government sides, really agree with the motions that this house believe that disposals of the political figures should not be recognized as public figures. So with that, I would like to propose things.
All right, thank you, Prime Minister. I'd like to invite the Leader of Opposition, here.
Sorry, just give me a minute to set my timer. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll start my speech with a few things that we disagree from the Prime Minister and the government side, and also things that we believe the Prime Minister failed to clarify properly, and why, on our side, our arguments should trump whatever they were saying in the first speech, right? So first of all, I will mention and list out all the things that we disagree, but my explanations for that should be later in my speech, so please pay attention to that. Number one, the Prime Minister talked about the definition of public figure. Yes, we agree, but we don't believe that the Prime Minister clarified it to a proper extent, which should be explained later in my speech. Number two, the stakeholders he mentioned. The stakeholders he mentioned were regarding political figures and also the spouses, but it's not just about that. This debate is not primarily controlled to just the political spouse and the political figures, but also the society as a whole, right? And how the society progresses or regresses. And number three, he also talked about how it would increase stigmatism. We assume that it is related to the issue of privacy, which would be one of my arguments later on. And he also talked about the moment you bring them into light. See, I will also explain the difference between just being in the light and actually being recognized as a public figure. Moving on, the status quo on our side, before that, as a leader of opposition, I will do a couple of things to support our case. Number one, I will tell you the status quo of how political figures and the roles of the spouses and how and why people are interested. I will also talk to you about how when you are a public figure, what happens, right? As a spouse, I will also tell to you the difference between being in the light and actually being recognized as a public figure. And on that note, I will tell you on on the note of influence, how valid is influence is in today's debate, and how does it affect the betterment of society and influence voting as a whole, right? So let's start. First off, the status quo on our side would be the spouses of political figures has always had significant value. They've always been in the light. It's not something new. It's not something that you just throw out into them at the end at the end of the day, right? So how do they have significant value? When people watch political figures, they're not just looking at what they do, their missions, their goals, their reports. They're not just looking blindly, but they're also looking at their private life. What does this affect? Why are people so interested in their private life? Why? Because people are always looking for something relatable. As a citizen, as somebody below and not of the ranking, we will always be looking at something relatable to connect ourselves and that political figure in order to influence our voting or how we see and view them as a whole, right? So spouses and the way these political figures treat their spouses is something that ties people together. Why? Because there's a lot of things that you can see from here. Uh, for example, you can see that how the political figure treats a spouse and how what's their marital situation, right? Let me clarify. People do care about their private lives, right? But they care to an extent that it gives them insight to how their character is and to who they really are outside of the parliamentary and outside of the bombastic speeches and debates, right? So I'll tell you, when you are a public figure, what happens? The prime minister clarified that public figure would be, I don't remember, but it's not exactly what we do agree to a certain extent, but we would like to add on to the fact that a public figure is anyone that has attention and power and influence. The prime minister stated that, yes, but he didn't stress about the power and influence. When we say power and influence, when we say a public figure, anybody can be in the spotlight. I can go out now naked in the streets and I can be in the spotlight. I can go on the internet and be viral for a few years, right? But as a public figure, what do you have? Number one, you have respectful titles. You're not Melania Trump. You are Melania Trump. You're not Donald Trump's wife. That's a big, significant difference. As a public figure, you have a respectful title. You are more respected, and you also have. Other than that, you also have sponsorships and things that cater towards the betterment of society that you can use. Right? As a public figures include social media influencers, anybody who has a platform and that can act out on that platform in order to progress a society and do better for the country or nation, right? Uh, Moving on the note of influence, I talked about influence, right? And so I'm going to explain to you how does influence and how it happens. So people, when the spouse is put into a public figure, people are going to notice not just the way they walk, not just what dress they wore on Monday, not what meal they had on Wednesday, but also they're going to notice whether or not these spouses do charity work, or how kind they are, or how they treat. All these things would furthermore cater towards influence that I will explain to you in two parts, right? So this will go into two parts. Number one, it would influence voting, and number two, it would progress the betterment of society. How does it influence voting? Yes, we believe that whatever the spouses do shouldn't ultimately influence a voter's decision into voting on into whether or not they're going to decide to vote for that political figure or not yet, right? Yes, they should ultimately look at the goals and the missions. Yes, we agree, but it does hold value. This influence, it does hold value onto how people would decide on whether or not to vote, right? For example, how Donald Trump treated Melania Trump and his other wives says a lot about what kind of person he is, and says a lot about how his voting graph goes, right? So my other part would be for the betterment of society. When you see these things, there is a part of you that consumes that, because you are a consumer. You consume material. You consume material that you see online, in news, on social media. People love drama. All these things, you are consuming them. So when you see people, these spouses specifically, doing good things, you are consuming this, and would also influence you and other people as a society to progress. Why? Because people tend to follow other people. People tend to jump on the bandwagon. As a spouse, you have influence and you have value and you have a power of other people and a society to influence them. The issue of privacy that the prime minister has mentioned, as a spouse, political figures, you chose to be. Yeah, talked about the prime minister didn't choose, but we believe that you chose to be there. You chose to be the spouse of a political figure. Therefore, you have always been in the spotlight. What we want is a world where you are not just in the spotlight, but you are respected for it as a public figure. You want them to be respected, just sponsorships, to progress as a nation as a whole, right? So those are the things that I have done, and will be elaborated furthermore by my other speakers. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Leader of Opposition. Let's resume the debate with the Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
Hello, am I audible?
I can hear some echo behind you.
Okay, one moment.
Can we begin? I think you're muted.
Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yeah, now I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay,
Right,
sorry. Ladies and gentlemen, today we are gathered here on to today's debate and we of the government side believe that this house believes that the spouses of these political figures should not be recognized as public figures, and already as mentioned by my government, uh, we the status quo of today's debate is obviously there are a lot of famous political figures, be it you know Bill Clinton and so on, who I mean, maybe even Clinton, but like a lot of famous political figures we're talking about who married a spouse who is more particularly could be a normal person, right? And obviously this makes their spouse also recognized as a public figure because that is the effect of being related or being married. Having a marital status to a political figure, and it makes them recognized from the public, and hence it makes the public figure to get makes them a public figure together with their partner, which is a political figure. But you have to understand in this debate, ladies and gentlemen, the stakeholders, of course, in the society, but also the public figures and the spouses of the political figures, who are also oftentimes normal people, do not wish to be recognized this way in the public eye. So as earlier mentioned, the metric of today's debate is whether the spouses of these political figures should be recognized as public figures or not, and why is it justifiable. So we here today of the government side are going to prove to you that that these spouses of political figures should not be recognized as public figures, and why it is better, and how we are protecting all stakeholders better than the opposition side. So before I move on arguments, move on to my rebuttals from the leader of opposition. As you can see here, ladies and gentlemen, that the opposition is really focused on protecting society. Of course, it's important as obviously the society has the power, to determine their leaders and so on. However, the leader of opposition stated that um, this public figure status, right, for the spouses of political figures is necessary as they have influence and power, which is true. Public figures do have influence, and whatever they say on social media could potentially affect and could be positive, right? Could have positive influence. However, ladies and gentlemen, as mentioned earlier by my prime minister already, he preemptively mentioned that, even though side opposition may argue that these spouses can be viewed in a positive light, but it still promotes this mentality that relates them to political figures without considering their own individuality. So instead of being viewed, positively as themselves, public figures will only be viewed based on their spouse, and basically it's centered around their spouse, right? So this positive view, or whatever positive influence they may have, can change easily. So the moment they do something wrong, for example, they would be viewed as it would lead to defamation, or maybe of the political figure themselves, compared to while obviously they could be good things, but just one slight wrongdoing, because you know how journalists are, they nitpick each and every movement of these public figures, of these political spouses, which is why we believe the government side that these political speakers should not these spouses of these political figures should not be given all this unnecessary attention, which I'll elaborate further in my arguments. um, and the spouses, the leader of opposition also mentioned how these spouses, chose to be the public figure, but already, as mentioned by my prime minister, that this is in his first argument, that it's not really much of a choice that they want to be a public figure. Because imagine, as he already mentioned, you marry someone that you love, and just because your spouse is a politician, he or she is a political figure, and even though you have no relation to get in that field of work, you just want to live an ordinary life, have an ordinary job, be whatever you want, but just because you're associated with them, just because you have your marital status is that you're married with them, you are now officially recognized as a public figure due to your spouse's occupation. So clearly, obviously, while you may have some positive influence, but oftentimes we humans, we're not perfect, so we do a lot of wrong things. So the moment you do something wrong in the public eye, you'll receive blame and stigmatization as well, which is overall bad for society as a whole, is it not? Detrimental. So moving on to my argument. So we of the government side believe that that by putting these spouses of political figures as public figures, it will just bring unnecessary attention to these political spouses. So obviously, as mentioned even by my prime minister, that these wives or husbands, spouses of these political figures, they may come from all sorts of backgrounds, even regular backgrounds, oftentimes, and are just not used to being a public figure. However, just due to this, the status of being married to their public figure, they become like some sort of famous celebrity. So imagine you're like, imagine your boyfriend is a not boyfriend, no, sorry, your husband is pub, politician, right? And then you just want to like grab a coffee from Starbucks or something. The moment you walk in, everyone starts shouting, "Oh, look, it's the wife of the president," or you know everyone starts taking pictures, and you just become like some sort of celebrity, put in the spotlight unnecessarily, when that is not something you want, because you didn't choose these spouses of these politicians, the political figures did not choose to be in this position. It's just what came at the cost of being married to these political figures, which is why we of the government side believe that these spouses, they should not given this unnecessary attention or recognition. And this would also affect them socially, because um, it sort of create this mindset, that like you perceive people wrong, just like these people who are married to these politicians, they seem to have like so much influence and so not, and whatnot, just because they're married to a politician, right? A political figure, even though they didn't like to achieve their popularity or anything in the first place. It's just a bad mindset instilled on society. So because of that, ladies and gentlemen, and we of the side government believe that we protect the stakeholders better as a whole, in society, political figures, and the spouses of these political figures as well, who should not be public figures, as we are able to make sure they are recognized as themselves and maintain their individuality, and not being treated differently, giving all this unnecessary public attention, when they should just we're not saying they shouldn't be uh, I mean, they shouldn't be the wives of their spouses who are political figures. They can still be wives or husbands to the spouses to the political figures, just not public figures. And with that, I've been proud to propose. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. Let's resume the debate by inviting the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here.
I hope I am audible.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. So first and foremost, with my speech, I will begin with a couple of rebuttals, moving on to my arguments as to my two arguments where I'll build up my case. And so moving on to my rebuttals, first and foremost, I would like to rebut the first thing that the Prime Minister has mentioned. They said that when these political figures mess up for some reason that they side government did not prove how and why the blame was shifted to the spouse, when these political figures mess up for some reason the blame was shifted to their spouse, um what, even though the spouse did absolutely nothing. So let me first say that I disagree with this statement because when you have a political figure going for campaigns, events, and you're giving speeches to the public audience, your spouse is there supporting you and encouraging you for all of these campaigns. It's not that she had nothing to do with it. She was fully aware of what you are doing, and it's not like she is blatantly just standing there having absolutely no idea of what is happening, but she's just giving a smile because that's what she's supposed to, or that's what she or he is supposed to do. So these campaigns, and another thing that the side government mentioned is that these spouses have no political backgrounds most of the time, but sometimes these campaigns and movement don't require political backgrounds for you to support and show that you are with them. It just requires logical thinking and some empathy for the humanity. So if the spouse fails to even recognize what logical thinking and empathy even looks like on their side, then I have no idea what they are doing in the first place. And second of all, there are a lot of media coverage from social media to news reports, online tabs, that will explain the root cause for the failure of a political figure. So, if there was no correlation between the spouse and the political figure themselves, I don't see why the backlash would go to the spouse of the political figure, unless there was correlation between the political figure and their spouse, and then obviously the backlash would go to both parties because they are both to blame. And moving on to my second rebuttal, side government kept on mentioning about individuality, but I would like to emphasize that individuality is not reliant on whether or not they are a public figure or they are not a public figure. It is reliant on the things you stand for. So if you are going to be racist, whether or not you are a public eye or you're in the public eye or not, you are still going to be racist. And if you're going to steal the taxpayers' money, with being a public figure or not, you are still going to do it. It's just that when you are a public figure, we can hold you accountable for the actions that you make, and I'll bring that up in my argument later on. And the second thing is the difference about being a public figure and not is that when you do things in the public eye, we can hold you accountable, as I mentioned. When you are married to a political figure who stands for certain things for the betterment of the country, who stands for the righteousness of the country, and who suppose for the righteousness of the country, but you don't stand for these kind of things, like my leader of opposition mentioned, it is easier for us to relate and to see and to judge whether or not we should vote for that political party. Because like side government mentioned, not everybody has a political background. Majority of the civilians don't have a political background. So they're not going to be amazed by the campaigns with the political analysis that they do. They would often be more relatable to what they see and what they believe and the principles that these spouses and their family hold instead. Moving on to my argument, spouses like Melania Trump, which is Donald Trump's spouse, and Michelle Obama, Barack Obama's wife, these people are very crucial in being a public figure. Why? Because they hold a certain degree of power towards the people of their husband's political party. So they hold influence, which is what our side opposition stands for. So if just say they support an oppressing manner or an oppressing movement that is going around in the world, uh, and if they're not a public eye, if they're not a public figure, they won't be held accountable for the things that they believe and they support for, which is clearly wrong, and which is why that you should not vote for these political parties knowing that the spouse or the family of this political figure actually doesn't even stand for what this political figure is trying to propose in the first place. If his family doesn't even stand for it, if his spouse doesn't even stand for it, what makes you think that he's not doing it just for the audience to get votes and whatnot? And let me give you an example. When Melania Trump visited the migrant shelter, She wore a jacket that was that stated, "quote I really don't care, do you?" Although that may not be symbolic to many people, but the normal civilians took that as a hidden message to show that she doesn't actually care about what she's doing at that moment at the shelter. And you will never see Michelle Obama do this. This is what we're trying to say, that these people have influence that they should be held accountable for. It's not like they didn't know what they were doing. They were fully aware of their actions, and they should be held accountable for them. For
POI.
later when my speech is over, please. So another example is that in our own country, we have Rosma. The things that she did, like money laundering and so much more, money laundering using the taxpayers' money. She, whether or not she was a public figure or not, she was bound to do all of these things. But the reason why the media coverage was so largely impactful on her and her spouse Najib was because she was a public figure, and that when it became, when everything was leaked out, it got the media coverage it was supposed to. I mention that I would accept POIs after my speech. Thank you. So if she wasn't a public figure, then everything would have been, they would have let it slide. The media wouldn't have been covering this, and the citizens wouldn't have been really fully aware of what they chose in the first place as a political party. And moving on to my second argument, in order for you to support or vote someone, you need to see the principle, you need to see the ground that they stand in. So for example, if the prime minister or any of the political figures say that, "Oh, I stand for Black Lives Matter movement," but then you see they are married to a person who does not stand for this kind of empathical movements that should be supported in the first place, because I don't see a reason why not. um you see that these spouses, they don't stand for what the political figures believe. So it's obvious that these political figures could probably just be saying what they are saying to gain the votes and to gain audiences. So this is what we are trying to avoid. We are trying to avoid the people, the civilians who don't really know what is happening, to fall for these fake hopes and these fake lies that the political figures are giving. So when we have a better understanding of where they come from, or where they stand, or where their spouses stand, with that kind of influence and with that kind of reassurance that we can get from these political figures and their spouses, we'll be able to make a better choice in choosing the political party. Yes, your POI, please.
No,
I don't know
it's
how
past 6.
can you?
It's
Oh,
past
okay.
6.
Sorry, I didn't realize. So I with that, I would like to recap. No, I would not like to recap. I would just like to say that it's very obvious that side opposition has the better win in this case of debate, as my leader of opposition and I, deputy of leader of opposition, has mentioned. So with that, I rest my case. Thank you.
Right. Please be reminded that the time to give and accept POI is only between the first minute and the 6th minute. Right. With that said, let's invite the government whip. Here.
Hello.
I'm hearing echoes.
Yeah, fixed already. I will start my speech in 3, 2, and 1. In the past 2 decades, the role of political spouses has come under heightened scrutiny. Being political spouses requires doing things that the public eye expects them to do, that they shelve their own ambitions in the service of someone else's, just because they decided to form a marriage with someone they love. Forcing these spouses, these husbands, these wives to stand behind their suited up spouses, waving and smiling while shunning down their own dreams. The opposition, all they did was emphasizing on the choices made by society, by the public, to put these political figures due to how they treat their spouses. First of all, problematic things coming from the opposition side. The first speaker has stated that if you are the spouse of a political figure, there comes a lot of things with it. First of all, she mentioned that firstly, respectful titles. In these respectful titles, there comes big responsibilities. As she said, there has this sponsorships and all. But the second speaker, the deputy leader, she stated that, when you are the spouse of a public figure, isn't it contradicting? Because she said that, I don't find it backlashes coming towards the spouses of these public figures to be relevant, because I don't find any backlashes to be done to the spouses of these public figures. And that, ladies and gentlemen, that is why we are protecting the stakeholders, which is the spouses of these political figures. And if we protect the spouses, there will be eventually, or a family, a marriageal institution that comes with a family, children, for example. So comes with these like respectful titles. That is something problematic. Comes with these respectful titles. There must be really big responsibilities done by the wives, husbands of these political figures. So that is one contradictory thing coming from the opposition side. All they did was ensuring the society that we choose the best political party just because of this one sole factor: how they treat their spouses, which, ladies and gentlemen, we don't find that it really relevant for society to only just view it from one side. We grew up to make rational decisions, not only based on one-sided decisions. So campaigns and all of these other factors, such as campaigns and openness to democracy, social and economic cultural equity, and an open and transparent government. For example, if that political figure and all political figures, not only just those who are in the high positions, or like not only political figures at high positions, political figures can also be consist of those who are new to politics, or under like other different positions, not the one controlling the whole party. So just by judging one specific person, one individual, on how they catered and how they treated their household and how they treated their spouses, just because of that one factor. So the opposition side kept mentioning, because of how they treat their wives, how they treat their husbands, how they treat their spouses, that is the only thing that they would judge this particular party for. So that is why we see it as one problematic thing that the opposition side has kept mentioning. They are who they are. They are married for one reason, which is love. So the opposition said that, it's a choice to be married to someone in a political party. But if they eventually developed a liking for politics eventually in their marriage, wouldn't it become a huge responsibility to the wives, to the husbands, to the spouses as well, if their spouses eventually develop a liking towards politics? So if it's love, you can't force to unlove someone when they are in politics. Then okay, you choose not to be with them. So that is one thing that we see as very irrelevant coming from the opposition side. So we don't want these spouses to constantly feel the need to become who they are not, just because their spouses are in the political limelight. As you all know, politics is a very individual-based scope. It is really based on individual preferences. So people become very defensive when it comes to individual reasons, and it will eventually lead to irrelevant and irrational reasons done, especially from a party to bring down another party by making fun or bringing down the opposing political figure. For example, one party wants to bring down another party by putting all these private matters on the table, which we see as very irrelevant, because it is private matters. Now you're pushing the private lives of these innocent spouses that has like this matter with their spouses who are in political parties. So you're pushing their private lives due to your own ego, in strengthening your own liking and their own strength of the party that you are voting for. So this is very detrimental towards the wives, the husbands of these political parties, because we see, as the government side, we're protecting the most vulnerable stakeholders, which are the wives, the family, or the spouses, the husbands of these political figures, because they are forced to have a lot of these responsibilities. So what my Prime Minister has said about the stigmatization of the public towards these public figures. So why do we see this as a very all-rounded point? This is because if the spouses of these political figures, they want to do something else, or they have other likings, but they have to stand and wave by their spouses just because they're the spouses and they are in love with their husbands. So that is why one thing that the society has towards these spouses, because they expect them to do what they need to do. for example, just support their spouses in political parties. And if they want to go to another profession, or a profession that isn't in the stereotype of political spouses, such as journalism, a very controversial profession, or any other profession that isn't catering towards the public's eyes in political spouses, they will think twice towards their dreams and their own hopes, because they're married to someone they love. Just because they're married to someone they love, we're protecting the most vulnerable stakeholders here, ladies and gentlemen, not only because of society, how society will pick the best party and all, because not all political figures are consisting of those who are in high positions. Also, political figures who are in low positions, or just develop a liking towards politics and join politics. So, in conclusion, we of the side of government protect the most vulnerable stakeholders, and better as we are able to make sure that they are recognized as themselves and maintain their individuality. So hence, it is clear that us, the government side, are doing better in ensuring that the society is creating better choice, and is only not based on how they treat their spouses. So with that, I'm very proud to propose the motion for today, and it will stand at the end of the day. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Government Whip. I'd like to invite the opposition whip. Here.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am the third speaker of side opposition, and I'll be fulfilling 2 tasks. My first task is to provide rebuttals against government who does not understand the need of spouses to be used as public figures. And secondly, I'll provide an analysis and a difference between the world that opposition side created, which is much more logical and much more practical with the current status quo, compared to the side that government created, which is just an illusion. Now, starting off with my first rebuttal, given by the Prime Minister of the government side, you said that when spouses get married with a political person, their mental health will be affected. Now, let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, what side government is trying to say is that when you marry someone blindly. You marry someone, you do not know their profiles. When you marry a political person, you do not know their profiles. That is not true. You actually know what they are. You actually know who they are. You know how a political party works. Why? Because it's broadly casted in the media. You know how it is going to work. You're not blindly marrying that person. And also, you're not forced to marry that person. If you do not want to marry that person, right, because of their political figure, then you choose not to marry that person. You're not forced to be married to a person, knowing that you are going to be involved. You're going to be looked at the public when you're marrying a political person. You sign vows. You said that you want to be together for better or for worse, and then and you have the right to change how your spouse thinks or does in a political figure. So you are prepared. You know how your mental health is going to be affected. Now, saying that their mental health of spouse are going to be affected is truly wrong. Now, second thing mentioned by the Prime Minister of side government is that when spouses get married to political persons, they need to drop their job. Why is there a need to drop their jobs? You are not forced to drop the job. Yes, you've been seen by the public eye. And what the whip mentioned is that when they want to pursue other careers like journalism and stuff, they can't do that. Why they can't do that? Why can't they do that? They can do that. They can be involved in other careers and at the same time contribute to the society, which is what side opposition is trying to achieve, where you contribute to the society, and you can achieve what other dreams and goals that you have set for yourself. And then moving on to my third rebuttal is that the society will view the spouse based on the person that they are marrying, which is truly wrong. You can change that. You have the power to change that. What did my LO say? My LO said that you hold the power. You're not fully controlled by your political spouse. You have the power to change their perspective, which was given an example by both my LOs and DLOs. They say that Melania Trump was not recognized as Donald Trump's wife, but recognized as Melania Trump. And then I'm going to provide another example. Hillary Clinton was Bill Clinton's wife. Hillary Clinton, she did her own goals. She appointed as the director of health in the care reform under Bill Clinton's presidency. She achieved her own goals. Now, let me tell you the side that opposition has created and the side that government has created. I'll answer that if I have time later. Opposition side, what we did was we create an insight on the characterization. When a spouse becomes a public eye, you'll be able to see them. The stakeholders here are much more protected compared to the side that government has created. Number one, the society is protected. Why? Because they are more convinced that more convinced to vote because they know that how the political person treats their own wife. Second thing, politicians can focus on other things, and we are also contributing to society as well as the spouses are protected because they can use their platform to do multiple things, such as what my LO told earlier, which is charity work. Now let us see the side that government has created. I'll answer that. I'll answer that after my speech has ended. The government side has created what the government side is trying to create is where society just assume what politicians are like. What politicians show towards the media and how they behave to their spouses, these are not shown. They want to hide it. And okay, what my DLO said that um Rosma was involved in money laundering, and this was portrayed by the media because Rosma was a public figure. So if let's say Rosma was not a public figure, she would continuously be doing money laundering, and this would not be recognized because what side government is trying to do is side government is trying to protect their spouses. But we know that spouses, when you know that love, you side government say that marriage is love, and you would do anything for your spouse. So that if you would want to do money laundering, you would do money laundering just for the benefit of yourself and the benefit of your spouse. So moving on to my fifth point. Throughout this debate, what side opposition gave you multiple proofs that when a spouse becomes a public figure, it's a good thing. Sorry, I'm going to continue. When a spouse is a public figure, there'll be multiple good things. We gave you Hillary Clinton, we gave you Michelle Obama, we gave you Melania Trump. But what side government was doing throughout this debate is just providing an illusion, just saying that there's negative impacts, but they fail to mention what are the negative impacts, and they fail to relate it with the status quo. They did not give us any example, any proof on how this is negative. And then for moving on to my last point, is that when we are given the platform, when spouses are given the chance to hold the power, they're given the chance to hold the platform. So I'm going to give you an example. We know that politicians are mostly men. So, for example, politicians get married to a woman, and the woman is able to remind their spouse that they need to protect women's rights. So, end of the day, that it's benefiting everyone. You're benefiting all the stakeholders in this debate. The woman can tell the spouse who's involved in politics to protect women's rights, which is what is done by Abigail Adams. She told her husband John, who is the country's first vice president, to remember the ladies, and which he did. So if you're hiding your spouse from the public figure, the spouse feels like there is no responsibility upheld by them to protect the society as a whole and to protect their rights and to protect what their husband needs. Because why side government is trying to do throughout this debate is just to hide their spouse. And with that, I rest my case. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Opposition Whip. I would like to invite the opposition's reply speaker to close their case. Here.
Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that the government side has been sleeping today on our points and do not exactly understand the motion of this debate or the arguments that we have put through today, right? Why? I'll give you a recap. I'll give you a listing of what happened today and a full recap on why we should win this debate. So first of all, starting from the very top, no, starting as a basic recap of what those three speakers said, the PM, the DPM, and the Gov Whip. What else they said, right? It can be summed up into a few things. Number one, that they didn't choose, that these spouses didn't choose to be there. Number two, that they have unnecessary attention. And number three, that they talked about how they married for love, which we believe is immature, unrealistic, and furthermore, they did not give a proper explanation how or why or proper analogy or a proper structure, or like how does that thought process come to be, right? Meanwhile, on our side, we have given you a proper analysis, layers and layers of analysis on why it is better a world on our side, right? So let's move on. So let's start off with the things that PM said, or rather the things the PM did not say. It was messy from the start. Why? First of all, they didn't give a proper definition of a public figure, which that burden of proof uh, fall onto our side of the party. When it was supposed to be the PM side to structure this debate wisely and to build the case on proper ground. But that ground was passed on to me, and I had to define properly what a public figure would be. Stakeholders, they didn't give us proper stakeholders. They talked about how increased stigmatism, but in my speech, I already responded to that by giving you it was related to the issue of privacy. They have always been in the light, right? On our side, we are focusing on the fact that these people have always been in the light. It's not something new. On our side, we are creating a better world for them. Despite being in the light, they are recognized as a public figure. I told you clearly the difference between just being in the light and just having influence and being a public figure. These are two differences that the three speakers has failed to address, right? So I've also told you how, moving on to the DPM speech, DPM talked about how they didn't choose, it was unnecessary attention, and that they would maintain individuality. Well, in my speech previously, I've already talked about the difference between being in the spotlight and actually having a title. And the maintain individuality part was rebutted by my DLO when she talked about how maintain individuality is directly to the political figure itself and what they choose and what they believe in. That's how that statement is related. My DLO talked about how the government did not explain how the fault falls to the spouse in the first place. They just put out a lot of narratives. They talked a lot of sentences. They said that the spouse would gain the fall, and they talked about how the society would regress, but they didn't explain or analysis or give you proper explanation on why that happened, right? They specifically talked, my DLO also specifically talked about the role of the spouse and that they are not blindly standing there. She talked about accountability. So I'd like to highlight on this. The government whip talked about how we were contradictory, talking about influence, because in my speech I was talking about good influence, and in my DLO's speech she was talking about bad influences. Let me tell you something here. Influences exist on both sides of the platform, right? That's good, that's bad. We are creating a world where both of these influences are better on our world. I talked about good influences and how they come to be. I gave you a psychological, neurological pathway on how that happens. My DLO talked about how accountability is better on our side rather than a world where they are not recognized as public figures and there is no accountability for their bad actions or their bad influence, right? Up onto my opposition whip. My opposition whip rebutted every rebuttal perfectly, and she also talked about how the society is in much a safer environment on our side because of the things mentioned in all of three of speeches, right? And she also concluded this debate and had actual examples. On this note, because all of these examples have catered towards today's side of the debate, and we believe that the opposition side should win. We have never been more proud to oppose. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's close today's debate. I would like to invite the government reply speaker. Here.
Hello, am I audible?
Slightly blur.
What about now?
I can hear echo.
Now? Hello?
Yeah, better. All right.
Thank you. So, I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Not everyone has to be seen as public figures. Ladies and gentlemen, for today's motion, I'm going to tell you why we of the government side have won this debate and why the opposition side has clearly misunderstood some of our arguments here and there, and into thinking that we are actually hiding these spouses and not holding them accountable to these things. But I'm going to prove to you why we of the government side are actually protecting the majority of the stakeholders better than the opposition. So on their side, hello, oh, sorry, on their side, um, they say they emphasize on how these political figures are, it's necessary for them to be as necessary for their spouses to be public figures in order for society to like determine who they should vote for because based on their behavior, which is true to some extent. But as already rebutted by my whip speaker, you know, while these spouses, are they really like the main thing that's gonna affect how these public will perceive them or whether they'll vote for them or not? And I mean you, the deputy leader of opposition said, it's how the public, who the public votes for, be it this party or that party, is mainly based on uh, the behavior of these political figures towards their spouses. When in actuality, that is, not the case. And she mentioned how campaigns and whatnot are not understood well by the public because the public isn't very well versed in politics. But you understand, ladies and gentlemen, that these campaigns in the first place are catered towards the public. They are already simplified in a way that can be understood for the public. So that's why it is, and it's an actual factor that will affect how the public perceive a political party. Even they keep on also emphasizing a political party when clearly in today's motion we're debating on the spouses of a political figure. So, as already reviewed by my word speaker, the other forms of factors that actually contribute, to the success of a political party or how the public would perceive them is, like openness, democracy, social, economic, cultural equity, and an open and transparent government. So we of the government side strongly believe that this public figure's status is not necessary. It is actually have an effect on that doesn't have a major effect on how the public will perceive these politicians, and is not necessary as it is causing more harm to the holders, which is these spouses of the political figures, than good. And I've noticed that the opposition side also actually misunderstood when I mentioned earlier how they keep on mentioning how when this political trigger spouses messes up, it shifts the blame to the spouse. But that's not what I meant. What I was trying to say in my speech is when the spouse, as a public figure with this influence, as they, emphasized on about, is messes up, then it shift the blame to the political figure or their spouse, the spouse's spouse. That makes sense because obviously they're in relation, they have a marital status, which is why that's what it will actually influence. So on our side, we are not hiding our spouses, but we at the government side are actually protecting them from the public eye. We don't think they deserve unnecessary attention or stigmatization, which is also detrimental to society as a whole. So this is why we of the government side believe that we protect all the stakeholders compared to the opposition side, and we do it better, which is why we believe that the government side has won today's debate. And with that, I end my speech. Thank you.
All right. Thank you everyone for the wonderful debate. Before I leave for my deliberation, I'd just quickly like to reconfirm UPM vetoed motion number 3 and UNIMAS vetoed motion number 2. Is it correct? So I'll take it as a yes.
Yes,
I'll
yes,
see you
that's
all
correct.
shortly. Right. Thank you.